delighted to welcome you to this session of the 15th Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega Swasth India. It is our pleasure to present today Chosen, Suyash Dasgupta and Arshya Gaur in conversation with Ranu Bhattacharya. 17-year-old Suyash Dasgupta's unique and multi-sensory debut novel, Chosen, explores the less spoken about aspects of teenage mental health, pertinent subjects such as physical, emotional, and substance abuse, and weaves original music, rap, and hip-hop with a sensitive narrative. Chosen has pages with QR codes that lead to songs that partner the story of a boy named Mason who loves poetry but is regarded as the school bully. Arshya Gaur is an 18-year-old author, mental health advocate, and entrepreneur. Her collection of poetry, How to Open a Parachute, is an honest dialogue around mental health and the turmoil she experienced. She is also the founder of Read Together, a platform that provides unique audiovisual educational resources to children that can otherwise not access them. In conversation with educator and author Ranu Bhattacharya, young pioneering writers and mental health advocates discuss their remarkable work and creative approaches. Suyash Dasgupta. Suyash Dasgupta is a grade 12 student at Singapore American School with deep interests in environmental science and technology, poetry, and songwriting. He grew up in India, South Africa, and Bangladesh and is currently based in Singapore. Fluent in English, Mandarin, Bengali, and Hindi, Dasgupta runs Digital Citizens, a service club focused on supporting first-generation learners at Anandalaya Public School in Jharkhand, India. His novel Chosen is a part of a multi-sensory project which integrates hip-hop style poetry with an original soundtrack to create a unique experience. Arshya Gaur. Arshya Gaur is a mental health advocate and edtech entrepreneur. Her book of poetry, How to Open a Parachute, talks about her journey with anorexia and depression. Gaur was invited as a panelist to the India Today Conclave 2019 to speak about the incidence of mental health among teenagers. Recently, she was featured by Microsoft for a unique audiovisual educational program, Read Together, and received the UN Volunteer Award for the same. Ranu Bhattacharya. Ranu Bhattacharya is an educator who has taught across the world and the author of The Castle in the Classroom, Story as a Springboard for Early Literacy. Her work focuses on nurturing the craft of storytelling through performance and art to bind lives and build communities. Please feel free to send in your comments by typing them in the comments section. Do follow our social media handles to get notifications on the upcoming sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, Chosen, Suyash Dasgupta and Arshya Gaur in conversation with Ranu Bhattacharya. Ranu, over to you.
Hello, Arshya. Hello, Suyash. It's an absolute privilege and pleasure to be here talking to the both of you today. As I've mentioned earlier in my messages, I've been in complete awe of all the work that you've been doing, both in terms of your writing and in terms of your advocacy. So without further ado, I just want to talk a little bit about, the content and the craft of your work. And particularly since you deal with some very, very relevant, but at the same time, very heavy issues. So Arshya, your work, How to Open a Parachute, talks about depression and anorexia. And Suyash, your work talks about physical, emotional, and substance abuse and the choices that your characters face as they're negotiating their journeys. So Arshya, would you tell us a little bit about the content of your work in terms of, where did you, how did this writing come to you? How did the ideas flow for you when you were writing?
So essentially, I never wrote these poems with the objective that one day I will be compiling them in a book and it will be published. It was something that came very naturally to me because I think many people who experienced any mental disorders or emotional disorders, they will relate to the fact that you're not very communicative. You don't really communicate much. So writing for me was a way of communicating with the world. I wasn't verbally talking to many of my peers or my parents. So just talking to a piece of paper was something that was very cathartic to me. And it all came from my personal experience. Days that I was feeling bad, days that I was feeling good. I think each poem in my book captures a different emotion that I was going through in my journey of experiencing anorexia and depression and recovering through that process.
Right. I mean, I hear that voice constantly in your writing as well. When you say that, let it out, and it's as if something is holding it back, but there's something even stronger within you, which is propelling it out, or it's something that was cathartic, like you said, that was bringing that voice out. So in a sense, you were the skin of your character, because you were the main voice in that entire verse that you've written. But
Yes.
so you had to become Mason, you had to become Jordan. So it's a different form of being in the skin of your character. So tell us a little bit about how that worked out for you. How did you go about that process?
For sure, yeah. My book is written, of course, empathetically. I haven't faced any of the issues that are written about in the book. But that's why a big factor for me when I was writing this book was authenticity, because I had to become the characters, and I had to sort of understand what happened to them, what made them the people they are. And that's what Chosen's all about. It's about the choices that make you who you are, and how you treat people based on your own life story. And so some characters in this book, one character faces mental health issues, and as Arsha was saying, it faces with the trouble, with the problem of speaking about it, because he has to suppress it because of the male facade of bravado. He's not able to speak to any of his friends about it, and so it suppresses and builds up. And the longer you suppress issues like these, when it comes out in a worse manner. So that's when you see Mason's father, who's the character who faces anxiety, that he physically abuses his son, and abuses alcohol as well. And that's why I do look through many people who face these issues, because I personally haven't faced them, to try to keep it authentic as I could. And that was my goal throughout this process, was making sure I was being able to fit into these characters' skins and speak from their eyes.
Right. So walking in the shoes of the character by immersing yourself, it seems almost as if research, as if you were talking to people, and also kind of trying to intentionally empathize. Because sometimes we talk about empathy, but we think it just kind of comes naturally. But there is an intentionality about empathy that you just mentioned, that maybe we'll talk about it later a little more in detail, because that's another thread that I was hearing very strongly in both your work as well. Now, the vehicle that you chose to let these voices out, for you, Arshya, it was poetry. And for you, Suyash, it's a novel in verse. You're using hip hop, you're using rap. So let's talk a little bit about these structures that you employed in order to let those voices out. Arshya, why poetry?
I think none of my poems, I think majority of my poems are free verse. Mm-hmm. And I think free verse is such a contemporary style of writing because there is no fixed method or metric that you follow. And that was the same thing that I was going through as well. No feeling was constant. No single day was the same. And I think that's the sort of environment and the feel that I wanted to create, the mood I wanted to create with my book. Because if I followed a structure, it meant that my journey also had a structure, or that anyone going through mental health issues has the same story, but that's not it. So the free verse was intentionally done.
Right. Okay. So That's very interesting that the path that you chose, or the vehicle that you chose, almost mirrored what your sensibility at that time. And there is a certain reflection between your writing and this free verse form that you chose. But at the same time, it was something that kind of fed into each other, and it also probably enhance that cathartic process from what you say. Am I correct in hearing that what you're saying?
Yes, because I think if I wrote in a very lyrical manner, in a manner that suggests that I spend time thinking about words, about rhythm and rhyme, it would suggest that I was constantly thinking about what I was writing and not actually what I was feeling. And it was not so. I wanted it to be as true and raw as possible.
Right. I'm going to hold on to that thought for a minute, because in spite of the fact that you said that, it was you were writing as if on the go, the imagery is so strong over there that the craft seems incredible. So I'm just going to hold on to that thought for a minute, and then before I speak to Suyash about the form that you took, because you kind of move between forms. You move between hip hop and rap, verse which is rhyming, verse which is non-rhyming. So let's talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So my decision to write a novel in verse actually started in class 6. When I read this book called The Crossover by Kwame Alexander. And that book really changed my perspective on literature, because I hadn't seen a book like that before. It was so inviting and easy to read, but it still had substance behind it. And at Singapore American School in 6th grade, actually, while I was reading this book, we actually got to meet the author himself. And that was super inspiring. And that's what planted this idea in my brain. Then later I read this book called Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, which is also written in verse, but instead of being as playful, it covers very, very serious issues. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to write something about something serious in a way that's inviting, so that people aren't shy away from the conversations that it sparks. And I did it in verse because I've always been interested in poetry, but also because of verse's implicit relationship to music. I was noticing that people around me weren't reading books. But when I walked into class, I saw everyone had their headphones in, listening to music, and I knew I could approach it in that way. I could get people to read through approaching it through music, and that's where the idea of planting music into the book first struck. And I thought, okay, what if I write some songs? Because if I'm gonna write 80 poems anyway, why don't I write a couple more in the form of songs and produce them? Because at that time I was actually getting into songwriting and tie it together. And that's how a form of the rap songs into this novel in verse was born. And as you said earlier, there's in the book you'll read that some of the verses are more structured, they have more complex rhyme schemes, while the other are more sloppy. And that's because there are the three speakers in the book. So there's the narrator, there's Mason, and then there's Jordan. And so Mason is the character who writes a lot. He is really into rap and all these sort of complex rhyme schemes from his favorite artists. And so whenever it's Mason speaking, I've tried to make it complex, lyrical. But then when it's Jordan, a little sloppier, and then the narrator a little very more structured, because it's a narrator, it's a outsider perspective. It's not one of these teenage characters. So each of the styles is sort of reflecting of the speaker and the novel.
Mm-hmm. Right. So again, really reflecting the skin of the character, the voice of the character, and remaining true to that as well over there. So we talked a little bit earlier about this, not crafting it carefully and having that certain sense of rawness about the piece, so that it's authentic and so that it really speaks to the soul, which is what I hear a lot in your poetry, Arshya, and in your writing as well, Suyash. But at the same time, what is remarkable is the very sophisticated imagery that both of you evoke, or invoke rather. And so, for instance, in Breaking Free, Arshya, you write, "My spirit roars like a tiger in a cage. It wants liberation from the shackles that hold it back." Now, those kind of lines, they're very raw, but at the same time, on a poetic level, they're beautiful. They're amazingly, beautifully crafted. I could spend a long time thinking about, oh, I want to write like this. So how does that work? I mean, when you pour your feelings onto a page, does it naturally flow like that? Would that happen for other people of your generation, for instance?
I don't think it happens for everyone, because for me it's just something that's very natural to me. I've also been a fan of, the whole romantic movement where artists are inspired by nature, and I personally really connect with nature. It's one of those things like writing that just connects to my soul. It's something that makes me feel good about myself. If I ever need lifting up, I'll look for nature, look at nature for inspiration. So I think much of the imagery I use is inspired by these elements of nature, because I connect my feelings and I associate them with, say sunshine, or the way the tiger roars, things like that.
Right. And then, Suyash, again, I'm just going to draw that thread from Arshya's, that poem, Breaking Free, and resonating very strongly in your Till My Last Breath, the verse that you have, or the song. And there is this line about another me's pleading, let me out. So there seems to be something which is in some kind of chains which needs to be let out. And you were saying that you write from this empathetic point of view, but whose voice are we hearing right now when you say another me's pleading, let me out?
Right, so that song is canonically written by Mason's father. He's the character who suffers the mental health issues, and that song is really him expressing to his listeners about how he's not being able to express his emotions to the people around him. And so the other me is the version of Joe, which is the character's name, who is able to talk, who is able to express themselves, but he isn't able to show that vulnerable side to the people around him, because he has to be the breadwinner, the man, is, at least that's what he thinks he has to be, the facade, again coming back to the facade of bravado, because he's a very strong, physically dominant man who has been playing the role of this alpha male his entire life. But the fact that he has to deal with these issues is something new to him. And so he really just wants to keep that side in, because the people around him see him as some strong, stoic man. But he wants to keep that point of view from the others.
Right. So these ideas of facades, these ideas of walls between even our loved ones, that we place consciously, unconsciously, whether we are suffering inside or not. This idea of facades and walls are something that kind of appears again and again in both your pieces of writing. How common do you think this is across the board amongst, say, amongst your peers, for instance? Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think, especially with the social media era, it really has become way more widespread, because people are able to craft their whole personalities over a series of photos. And if you never meet someone and you just scroll through their Instagram or something, you already have your judgment on them, and you don't actually know the real them. And so they can really control and sculpt the person that they are to the entire world. And that's completely changed it, because not many people meet some of the people that they follow, and everyone immediately has a judgment on people based on the images that they see initially on someone's social medias. And that builds into this facade thing, because everyone wants to be perfect. So everyone can be who they want to come across as.
Right.
think
Arshya, would you
so.
like to comment? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I think Suyash like hit the nail on the head while talking about, the whole social media thing, but I'll sort of deviate a bit and I'll talk about things closer to home. So like parents, I think a lot of relationships between children and parents is more about talking and less about listening. And I feel like when you talk and you don't listen, that's where conversation is not happening, because conversation is a two-way thing. You can only call it a conversation if I'm talking and you're listening and you're absorbing. But I feel like many times teenagers or parents may be trying to get something across, but the other person is not able to understand where you're coming from. And when that happens, then immediately you feel that you're being judged or what you're saying is not traveling. And when you see what you're saying is not traveling, you feel that what you're saying is not worthy enough. And when it doesn't become worthy enough, you internalize it. So I think these are some gaps which exist in today's relationships. And also part of that, these gaps existing is like, Suyash said, because we spend so much time on social media and thinking about people's perfect lives that we forget to look at our own.
Right. So what we're talking about is that active listening or deep listening, and also at the same time talking, because both of you talked about, this has to be a two-way conversation. I mean, I can talk all I want. I can talk to my children can talk back at me, but if you're not really listening to each other, if you don't have that sense of empathy, if you have a lot of judgment, it becomes very, very difficult for us to even hear what the other person is trying to say. There's a beautiful poem I think it's by John Fox, and it's called When Someone Deeply Listens to You. And there's some words in that poem that I'd like to share with you guys today. And it says that, he says that when someone deeply listens to you, it's like holding out a dented cup you've had since childhood and watching it fill up to the brim with cold, fresh water. When it balances on top of the brim, you're understood. When it overflows and touches your skin, you're loved. When someone deeply listens to you, your bare feet are on the earth, and a beloved land that seemed distant is now at home within you. So when I read this poem all the time, because, as a parent, as an educator, we've all had our share of not being the best version of ourselves, I think, at some point of time, because there's so many things that get in the way. There's so many, so many other things that get in the way. And Arshya, you talk about intentionally talking so that you don't choke, to let it all out. Talk so that you can be free. Talk so that you can be the best version of me. And Suyash, you also talk about, I think this is the dad who writes his song. And he talks about conversations that make me feel and conversations that make me heal, and the verbal bandages. So how do we go about, I mean, it's all very well to talk about deep listening and active listening and really talking it out. How do we go about this? We're making so many mistakes with each other constantly. How do we get past that? Arshya, would you like to go? Would you like to share?
Sure. I think in this 21st century fast-paced, lifestyle, I think time is the most precious thing that parents can give to children or children can give to parents. Because I think the moment you dedicate some time to having these conversations, they become that much easier. When you show that you're approachable, then it becomes an easier thing for me to say that I want to talk. But if I feel that you're not approachable and you don't have the time to listen to me, then I think it becomes much more harder. So I think this conscious effort of taking out that time and making it aware, making it known that you're there to listen, because many times I feel in your head that I'm there for my child. But if the child doesn't know that you're there to listen to them, it doesn't matter.
Right. So again, I hear intentionality behind what you're saying. Like, let's purposefully make this happen. It doesn't automatically happen for, we've taken it for granted. Oh, children talk to their parents, parents talk to their children, but it doesn't happen this way. And there are particular pressures that are prevalent now that almost prevent it from happening. All those facades, that social media, peer pressure, for instance. So Yash, you also talk a little bit about this idea of peer pressure, because in your book, the characters, they are not who they seem they are. I mean, you see a facade and there's a completely different person behind that. So is that, again, something that you noticed, that's something that you observed, that you chose to write about this as well?
Yeah, definitely. I've had many conversations with people who, when I've just heard about them or I've seen them across the hallway or something, I've already had an initial judgment of them. But then when I speak to them, they're a completely different person. Even sometimes without them knowing, because they're trying to still convince me that they're this person, the person who they want me to see them as. But you can tell if you have a genuine conversation with someone. You can look into who they really are. And it's this that I wanted to explore with Jordan and Mason, of course, one being the bully who beats people up, who actually genuinely just loves to write, who wants to express his feelings through poetry and rap, versus the perfect student, perfect helper, faithful boy who actually just wants to party, wants drugs, wants to drink. And I've seen, I wouldn't say I've seen exact people just like Mason or Jordan, but I've seen these similarities in many people. There's people who want to come across as this macho person who is actually very, very into poetry or art. And then there are people who come off as just perfect, but then actually have deep flaws in them. And that's where I observe this to put into shows.
So how do we go past these self-created binaries? How do we go past this idea of, if you're so-called macho, you cannot be sensitive, or that they're different, that they're polar opposites of each other. I mean, it seems almost that we've created for ourselves a vocabulary in the school halls, at homes. We've created these binaries for ourselves that are leading us to lead very uncomfortable lives of not again, in Arshya's words, being the best versions of ourselves. So how do we get past that? How do we kind of dig past all of that that we've created for ourselves? This whole vocabulary, the context, the judgment. How do we kind of break past that? Is writing a way? Is speaking out a way? I don't know. Would you like to talk about that, Arshya?
I think getting more people to know about your cause, in the sense, getting more people to talk about their feelings, because if I'm the only one saying it, or if I'm the only one feeling it, it makes me feel more lonely. So I think the fact, or knowing that I'm not alone in this, is something that helps a lot. And whether that be, having more mental health classes in school, or having, more conversations about having bad days and being okay, or saying that it's okay to not be okay sometimes. Even I know it's cliched, but it helps a lot, just knowing that you're not alone in this. Because mental health can, like, suffering through mental health issues can feel so isolating. And at times, even when the person going through it feels like they don't need help, that is when, their family, their friends, their peers need to actually come together and hold their hand and consciously tell them that, what, we're here and it's fine.
Yeah, I really like what you said about, just opening up the conversations, advocacy, and also the mental health classes, like These issues exist, and we have spent a lot of time, I think, just pretending that they don't. I mean, they exist everywhere, and we are more isolated in spite of all the technology, in spite of the so-called things that bring us together. They are also isolating in the same way. So Yash, what are your thoughts on some of these issues that Arshya just talked about?
For sure. I think she's perfect when she says that it all starts with conversations. And it all starts with making sure that everyone's aware that these issues are okay to have, they're normal to have. Because just one example is whenever you see some celebrity or someone coming out, like, I have these mental health issues, instead of support, when you look through all the comments, it's all like, oh, you have all this money, you have all this fame, you have everything. How can you be facing these issues? And understanding that it's more than just that. It's understanding the root causes of these issues and how prevalent they are, and that it's normal to have them, and learning how to help people out of these. Because sometimes when if your friend tells you, okay, I'm facing this mental health issue, you don't know what exactly to do, because we just haven't been educated about that. Not many schools teach about what to do. My school, though, has been doing a great job with educating us on these mental health issues. But I know many schools around the world that it's just simply not something that people cover, because it's not something that many people even exist is something to worry about. And if we can somehow change those people's perspectives or make them understand where these victims and all are coming from, then maybe we can form the bridge towards understanding and having these conversations, these supportive conversations that need to be had.
And of course, so everything was, I think, exaggerated to the nth degree by what's been happening these past 2 years. So, the P word, the global pandemic, and it's the way it's affected children, the way it's affected, of course, everybody. But I think in some ways, for young children, for young adolescents, it's been particularly hard, because as it is, you're going through all kinds of challenges, and then suddenly you're isolated. You're in this little box, and that's how you're interacting with your peers. So I feel that the need seems even more urgent now than ever before. What are your thoughts on that, Arshya?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think more so because mental health is such a silent suffering, in the sense that it's not a wound that you can openly see and you can treat with a bandage and it's done, you can forget about it. Right. It's something that you can't see or at face value. Sometimes you can, like something like depression you can, but in the initial stages you can't. And that makes it even more worrying, because you don't want it to reach a point where it's beyond repair, or where it's too broken. So I think all these conscious concerted efforts at from an early stage in life, or at regular intervals, are really, really important, especially now when, with the pandemic, with social media, the propensity, or the ability of people to get these issues is heightened by various degrees.
Right. Yes, of course. I think, and the sense of isolation, I think, even finding or establishing a relationship with a therapist, which has to be online, even that itself is challenging, because you're not going to meet that person probably in real life for a long time to come. So kind of noticing and getting in as quickly as possible, and acknowledging, addressing, accepting, all of those things seem to be key in the way forward. So Yash, do you have any thoughts about that? You said your school has been doing a lot about just sensitizing people to some of these issues. Did they take any particular measures these last couple of years to further kind of strengthen that?
Yes, so it's definitely been heightened these last 2 years. They like just yesterday we had an hour-long webinar that everyone had to watch about a bunch of people discussing their mental health issues, just to that was mandatory for everyone to see, just to make sure that everyone realizes these are real issues. And I feel in the pandemic, this is even more important, because I mean, the pandemic just has heightened the divide between us. And as Arshya was saying, it's hard, it's very hard to see these things face to face, but it's impossible to see them online. And that's when all our conversations are now going online, and that just makes it's more people are facing these issues, and B, less people are being able to share that or having the face-to-face conversations that are required to help these people. And so that's why my schools, they've been doing many talks. There's many people in our school that are facing these issues, and they've been very positively advocative about their issues, and have been educating the rest of us about how to help, how to support them, and how to understand them.
Right, I can imagine. I'm so grateful that your school's doing that for that entire community. I think that's incredible. I think also in both your pieces of work, there's a strong resonance, a strong voice of a call to action. And that's a little bit about what we are talking about, that this is an urgent need. Mental health is something that we need to face head on in some ways, and that this is an urgent need, and that we need to figure out ways to address it, figure out ways to learn how to manage it. Because Arshya, like you said, it's not something that you can kind of just put a bandage on and it disappears one day. It's something that one learns how to manage. It's a condition that one learns how to live with in some ways. It never really disappears. And you talk about like hurdles in your poem, that beautiful poem, Hurdles. You talk about how everyone should and must learn to deal with the epistemology of loss. And everyone must learn how to cut loose ends and tie firmer knots. So Yash, in your, I think this is when Jordan is reacting back to Mason, and there's these beautiful lines about, and Mason, as we know, is this very macho guy who's a bully, but at the same time he loves writing, he loves verse, and Jordan tells him about, he kind of just spot on kind of addresses this elephant in the room, and he says, you hand out beatings just to avoid your feelings. Instead of your fists, you could have used your voice. Realize, Mason, that initially you too had a choice. So I'd like, I feel sometimes that, Arshya, you are in Delhi, Suyash, you're in Singapore, but there's just these threads that were running between, there was this current running between the pieces of work that was talking about, about choices, really, about this call to action, that it has to be a personal choice, as well it has to be a larger societal choice. Arshya, what are some of your thoughts on these ideas?
I think definitely, because I think you need to be the first one to take that step, to take that plunge, to recognize that you need help. And then I think the moment you recognize that you need help and you need to, let things out, society will be compelled to help you, in the sense, because if I'm not vocal about it, no one in this 21st century is going to stop and look and actually notice and help you, besides your own parents, that is, of course. And sometimes even they can't do it. So I think when you choose that you need help and you choose that you want to be the best version of yourself, that's the starting point of your recovery.
And then there's more intervention needed. So that the starting point has to be from within, and then you need intervention.
Definitely.
Which is from outside, to learn how to manage all of this. So Yash, in Jordan's words, for instance, he seems to suggest that, why do you use your fists? You had all of these things within you, all of this, roiling emotions within you. You could have used words, which is in a sense what Arshya actually, she walked the talk. That's what she did. She used those words to express. So tell us a little bit more about what you wrote about essentially.
Yes, so as mine is more like empathetically written, my call to action is more towards the people who are watching people facing these issues. So as Arshya is about people who are facing the issues themselves, as I have not done that, I don't think I have I have the authority to call those people to action. But instead, what mine is mainly about is to spark up the conversations with the people who are facing these issues, to be open to having these conversations, because you're going to find a whole new side of this person that you've known for this long, and opening them up to facing the world is my goal. Sparking as many new conversations about these less spoken about issues is the goal of Chosen.
Right. So where do you think literacy plays a role in all of this, in mental health? Where do you think literacy, reading, writing? So Yash, you talked about how you notice a lot of people were not reading, but they were listening to music. Mm-hmm. Arshya, I know you do this thing about let's read together. It's that idea of underprivileged children, and you're giving them a platform so that they learn how to read, or they fall in love with reading. So where does literacy or universal literacy fit into, what's the bridge between literacy and mental health, for instance?
I think without literacy, it's very hard to communicate an idea so complex as mental health. And like education systems all over the world need to adapt themselves in a manner where they're not only imparting textbook education, but they're actually imparting things that you and I experience or notice in our day-to-day lives. And mental health is a huge aspect of that. I mean, it's as fundamental as understanding the way the world works. You need to understand the way your mind works, how you work. So the way we understand human anatomy and like biology, understanding the neuroscience is as important, because
absolutely,
it's something that you and I go through on a daily basis. So I think without that literacy at the grassroots level, it's very, very complex to make people understand that it is an issue that is serious, and it's not just something, it's not a phase like everybody thinks, and it's not something that's made up or for attention seeking.
So what I'm hearing you say is that your stories, your personal stories matter, and those personal stories need to come into, the classroom spaces. They need to come into education, so that we are not always dealing with some character who's fictional, who we don't really have all that much relevance or resonance with. But you and your friends and your peers are those stories that actually make up that community, and those voices need to be heard very, very strongly. So Yash, what are your thoughts on where literacy and mental health kind of, where do they meet?
For sure, I think some people who are facing these issues and want to have the conversations, but they're not comfortable with the people around them. They don't want to have the conversations with those people, and that's where literacy comes in. You can write those issues, like as Arshya has done, which is I'm in awe of. But she's been able to pen her issues down, and other people who have those issues are being able to relate to them. So people. You can either write your issues out, express them, so you're speaking to someone, you're speaking to the page, or you can pick up these books and read and realize that, look, you're not the only one in these issues. It's normal. There are other people who are feeling the same issues. While my generation doesn't read as much anymore, I know so many people who are facing these issues. They just listen to music of similar artists, just expressing their emotions. There's one album called Man on the Moon that I know many people listen to, and it's very therapeutic to them, and understanding other people expressing their problems that you're also facing can be very therapeutic.
Wow. So that was a lot that we covered in these few minutes, from your personal experience to what message we can send out to the world, to homes and to schools across the world, and hopefully more people will take up the baton and pass it on. Thank you very much, Suyash. Thank you so much, Arshya. I continue to learn from you as expected. I learned a lot from you today, and I wish you all the best, and I look forward to more of your work in the future. I can't wait to see where your writing will take you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suyash, Arshya, and Ranu for initiating a dialogue about mental health in young adults and sharing your insights. And thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Please stay logged on to continue to watch with us the series of exciting sessions featuring a stellar list of speakers that have been specially curated for you. Stay tuned for the next session.